Thank you. Thanks for being here, everyone. It's the end of the day and like long day, lots of stuff coming at you. Just really quick intro. Yeah, Matt Davis, also known as Nitzmahone. It's been, let's see, a little over 11 years that I've been working on Ansible Core in various roles, but took over as kind of doing most of the architecture stuff for Core a while back. Started on the Windows things. Started before that as a user back in 2014. It's been quite a journey, but it's still so much fun to work on something that I love and that other people love, and it's a real treat. So we'll cover some of this stuff today, and I'm going to be here the next 3 days. Like, I'll probably kind of default to hanging out by the Ansible booth. So if there's anything you want to talk about, just like, hey, look at my playbook, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Like, am I holding this wrong? I'm having this problem, whatever. I love, that's my favorite thing about conferences like this, just talking to people over the shouldering, talking over things, figuring out ideas. That's how a lot of these things have led to new features in Ansible and things that we've wanted to change. So today we are talking about Jinja. It's one of those things, right? Call these things what you will. The curly, double curlies, mustaches. They've got lots of names. The one I like is Handlebars, and it kind of fits a little bit with our the theme that will become apparent later. But I'll say that it was a struggle for me to write this talk. The things that I've been working on the last two and a half years, if any of you have touched Ansible Core 2.19, that's been my labor of love the past 2.5 years or so. And it involved being just neck deep in Jinja. That was the biggest part of this thing, was just kind of completely rewriting the way Ansible interacts with Jinja and trying to break as few things as possible. I feel like I had about 3 or 4 hours of content for this talk, and tried to kind of take the bits and pieces that I would hope would appeal to. So there's hopefully a little something in here for everyone. If you didn't get what you wanted out of this talk, if there's something you want to talk about with Jinja, please come find me. I'm happy to wave my hands and talk about Jinja. There's lots of interesting things to talk about. So if you don't get what you want, maybe come find me, and we'll see if I can get you what you want. It's pretty hard not to do anything real in Ansible and avoid using handlebars, using Jinja template expressions of some kind. But when we're talking about handlebars, right? The handlebars on a bicycle, they're there for safety, they're there for control, and that's the kind of thing that we're hoping to when you're using handlebars in your Ansible content. Those are the kinds of things that we want you to be looking for: is safety and control, nice smooth ride. Doesn't always work out that way, but we'll see what happens. It all looks so simple. Really, it's not. Every single one of these little handlebar expressions, you might be really surprised if you knew what was going on underneath the covers there. It's an ephemeral code generated Python module. Every single time one of those things is encountered in your Ansible playbook, it goes out, coughs up some Python, compiles the module, loads it, runs some stuff. This is the actual code behind inventory hostname pipe to the upper filter. This is the actual code that gets coughed up and run. There's a lot of stuff in there. That's a really, really simple template. Why do we need all this stuff? Why do we need all that complexity? Yeah, maybe we don't. I mean, plenty of good automation has been written in this style, right? No handlebars, just straight up YAML. You could probably get away with this, but it doesn't scale very well. Isn't something like this a little bit better? Instead of having all of my things, I can kind of abstract some of this stuff off to my inventory, and then I can just say hey, I want to install these packages with this stuff. And those of you that have been using Ansible forever, you're looking at this and you don't probably see anything bothersome, but boy, those quotes. I really, really hate those quotes. Does anybody else hate those quotes? Yeah, you feel me? Okay, so that's one of our first little problems that kind of sends people over the handlebars. So I'm going to take a little aside here. what's up with the damn quotes? So the handlebars that Jinja uses for its default template expression delimiter, really unfortunate default that collided with something really important in YAML. Any unquoted YAML string that starts with one of those curly braces is interpreted as an inline mapping. So YAML thinks you're trying to stuff like a JSON style dictionary in inline there. Any place else that one of those things happens, I think most of you probably, if you've been dealing with Ansible at all, you probably know this, but anywhere else in the string, like as long as it doesn't start the string, you can put unquoted handlebars. You don't need to quote the whole thing. It's just the one that, if it's the very first character in the string, it's got to be quoted or it's got to be dealt with some other way, you know, YAML, block bolding, anything like that. You know, people who thought about this in later systems, they came up with a different compromise. So if you look at like GitHub Actions, AZP, some of the other things out there, they'll use dollar handlebars instead of just handlebars. That keeps YAML happy. It's not starting a string. It doesn't screw anything up. And this is actually something that Ansible could trivially use. We could set this up so that it could work both ways. I've actually done it. The thing that I'm going to be demoing with today has this patch on it. It's a 3-line code change. It's like dirt simple to do this. So why don't we do this? Well, there are really minor but possible backward compatibility problems with this. So take a look at this one. All right, this little guy right here, this $sign. Is that supposed to be part of the template or is that supposed to be part of the delimiter? Same thing with this guy. Is that supposed to be part of what the command that we're sending, or is that a delimiter? So that's why we don't do it. I figured that little hack out, I don't know, maybe five years ago or so, and it's like, this is handy. But we've just been really nervous about, you know, how many people are doing something like that that's going to go sideways. So, you know, these are the kinds of things we have to balance when we're doing when we're dealing with stuff like this. It still might happen someday if we can figure out, you know, how to hack in a deprecation or to check something that says like, hey, you know, you're using something, you need to do something else. There was another compromise that we talked about for it, which was making it so that you only need that if you're using at the very beginning of a string. So like basically we would interpret it the second way if it didn't start the line, and we would interpret it the normal way as a template delimiter only if it started the line. So let's talk about a few of the different kinds of things that are in Jinja. And again, remember, I'm trying to like catch a little something for everyone here, so this may be really remedial stuff for some of you. We'll get to some hairier stuff later. So the actual thing that we call templates in Ansible, these are like full Jinja templates. A real Jinja template can contain multiple of these handlebar expression blocks and static text. They also support these directive blocks you may have seen for looping, locals, macros, includes. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with kind of full Jinja templates. Those things in Ansible are supported for text templates, which was actually the first thing that they came in back in like Ansible 0.4, I think, with the template module when that first showed up. That was there. Jinja was in Ansible only to support like templating files with the template module. Like the playbook stuff came later, but the variables and playbook keywords, all that stuff, back in really early Ansible days, it was like $sign templates, and that stuff got all kind of nuked out of there a long time ago, long before I was a user, I think. But in any case, you get the full power of Jinja when you're talking about like classic templates. So another option that we have is expressions. In older versions of Ansible, expressions were only used in a handful of places. But Jinja actually has a first-class concept of an expression. So basically an expression renders one value. And so it can use filter and test plugins. And an expression is really what lives inside of those handlebar brackets. So the thing that constitutes something valid to go inside of those handlebars is an expression. You can't have embedded handlebar expressions and directive blocks or anything inside one of those. So just, as an example of an expression, I'm sure you've all seen things like this. And then Ansible has kind of a special concept of an expression, a special case of it. This isn't a Jinja thing, this is an Ansible thing, but a conditional is a special expression that can only yield true or false. So you're probably familiar with these if you use like the assert action, or if you use like the when and any of these, like when, until, assert. All of these things are using conditional expressions, and it's been really loose up until 2.19. Actually, can I do a quick show of hands? How many people have like tried 2.19 or 2.20 Ansible, and just thumbs up or thumbs down, like was it a good experience, or like do you have a lot of problems? Okay, any of you that are not thumbs up, come find me and tell me what it was. Like I'm here for the next like 2 days. Come find me, go to the Ansible booth, tell them you want to talk to me, they'll find me. I want to hear what's up. So in Ansible 2.19, one of the more controversial changes is that a non-true-false conditional result is an error. This came about through various things that go to the love letter talk tomorrow if you want to find out more. But so a question that I get asked a lot just from people not kind of understanding what's going on is a playbook a Jinja template? I mean, it kind of looks like one, right? I mean, it's like you got text, you got like handlebar expressions all over it. Kind of looks like a Jinja template. But it is a common misconception that no, an Ansible playbook is not itself a Jinja template. The template ability of any given keyword in there is completely implemented by that keyword, the support for that keyword. So the playbook itself is never, we don't ever like just run the playbook text through a template engine. There's a whole bunch of special sauce under the covers about like that implements Ansible features that Jinja out of the box doesn't provide. So the biggest ones that come to mind are the kind of automatic lazy templating on fetch. So you probably take it for granted with Ansible that if you ask for a variable and it contains another handlebar expression, that thing will get rendered, and then if that thing jumps to another variable that has a handlebar expression, and so on and so on and so on, that kind of recursive evaluation is not a Jinja feature. That's something that's actually implemented by Ansible in its variable storage system. And then one of the other kind of special sauce things is the native mode and some of the weird magic that makes this stuff, especially for classic Jinja, which is kind of basically gone in 2.19 and above, but the special sauce that makes that stuff look like objects, and that was also the source of all sorts of problems in pre-2.19 versions of Ansible, where if you had your output, happy string that looked just right, it would get like picked up by literal eval and turned into something that wasn't a string. So we've pretty much been able to kill all of that stuff off in 2.19, but the Ansible native mode was implemented by another guy on the Ansible Core team and contributed back to Jinja. That is the default mode that we use now in 2.19 and above. And then the templating stuff that occurs in a playbook, it actually has almost all of the interesting stuff actually happens like at the task keyword and below. So while you can have templates like kind of all over the place, most of that stuff ends up getting kind of compressed, and the actual work happens down at the task keyword. So basically, to answer the big question, is the playbook a Jinja template? No. In fact, like each keyword value in Ansible can be its own full Jinja template. So if for some reason you really want to go nuts and have like macro blocks and sets and whatever, you can do it. One of the other questions that we get asked about a lot is like, can I template a playbook? Can I do some magic to like template a playbook? Well, if you want to do one out of band and like send it over to us as text, sure. But fully dynamic plays, blocks, tasks, that stuff is not currently supported, or really, I don't want to say it's not supportable, but it would be all kinds of a nightmare to make it work. So yeah, the dynamism that's there is there, and if you want to do something else, like probably best to just like generate playbooks and hand them in. So let's talk about a little template behavior inside of Ansible. So again, probably most of you are fully aware of this, but people are sometimes surprised, especially when they first come to Ansible. They don't really understand like, where is the templating happening? Is it going off to the remote machine? And no, like all of the templating, all the Jinja stuff, it runs on the Ansible controller inside it. And then just some kind of principles that we use when we're doing things, and that, if you're doing custom plugins or other things, you're not necessarily bound to these, but these are probably good things to keep in mind. templates generally should not have side effects. Those things get evaluated sometimes more often than you think. Most of the time, it's pretty predictable when a template is going to get run, but there are some weird cases where things end up getting run through more than once, where there's some best effort. Well, we're trying to do something locally early, and if it's too early and there's something, we have to defer it. So parts of the template may actually run more than once. If you ever stick a counter in something and watch how often your template runs, sometimes you'll get surprised, especially for things that have, when you start getting into like debuggers and other things that are inspecting and digging around in variables. Like a lot of that stuff is very kind of, it happens automatically and it happens recursively depending on how you ask for it. So just be careful with side effects in templates. Like in general, it's a bad idea. And if you are going to do them, you should make sure that they're at least idempotent. And again, that also means, when you're doing those custom filter and test plugins, if you're doing things with lookup pipe, like you stick to read activities, like side effects are not good. Templates, not just strings and scalars. They can be, you can return kind of arbitrarily deep data structures and all sorts of crazy things. And as I've mentioned a little bit, we have this concept of kind of lazy recursive templating. And so if you have a big data structure that's full of templates, in general, we're not going to template all of that stuff until you actually descend into the part of the container that's using that stuff. Now, pre-219, that was not always the case, and in fact, it very often was not the case. So I'll have some demos here later to show some of that. But so yeah, the laziness is vastly improved. That really helped a lot of things for performance, and also just especially if you've got templates that don't render, if there are parts that shouldn't be accessed, you don't have some variable defined and you shouldn't be accessing some part of the template and it accidentally got rendered anyway. Those are really hard to debug, so 219 and up shouldn't happen nearly as much. So let's take a look at a quick demo of part of that. Let's show this. Is that readable enough for the screens? Yeah, let's see. Better? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at this. It's a really basic little playbook, but what I've got here is just a local variable with a mapping in it that has three mappings underneath it. So the top mapping, the variable is called complex value. There's one underneath it called fast stuff that just has like a static string and a template with a really basic, just not really dynamic thing in it, and then just a static list. I've got another one called slow stuff that's got a lookup in it with a sleep and an echo. So whenever that template gets rendered, it's going to basically block the entire thing for 5 seconds every time that thing gets rendered. And then we have another one underneath here called broken stuff that's got a divide by 0 and an undefined variable in it. So, and then we've got another one here called references slow stuff. I can't remember if I left that in there or not, but so for our tasks, all I'm doing is I'm just using debug var just kind of as a stand-in for accessing these variables. But if I go and access complex value.fast stuff, that should just, you saw what's in there. That should return basically immediately and cough up the values that I asked for. And then we've got this one down here. The next thing I'm doing is that references slow stuff. So I'm indirectly referencing the slow stuff thing that's going to do that template. I'm hitting that thing 4 times and adding them together. So just mashing that all up. So if I run this thing in 218, can't type at this angle. Okay. Oh. Bypassing the slow parts doesn't look like it's working right. Did you see all that delay? And then, oh, guess what? It bombed. That's because 218 isn't as lazy as it's supposed to be. So even though we only asked for fast stuff, 218, when it retrieved that complex value mapping, it recursively templated the whole thing. So first we hit the fast stuff, great, and then it got onto the next one. That's why we had the delay, and it's sitting there, and then it got down to the broken stuff, and it hit the divide by 0 and went, okay, so, and we have our crummy error message here. So at least kind of told you what happened, at least you hit the divide by 0. But it's not super nice to look at that. So let's go to 221 and see what that looks like. This is about the same, 219, 220, 221. Oops. Okay. So you saw it came back really fast, that first one, cool. And then this one's blocking, it's only gonna block for 5 seconds even though we hit that, even though we asked for that thing 5 times. So again, 219 and up is a little more aggressive about caching things intra-template. So we don't cache stuff across template runs, but within a given kind of top-level template operation, if there are recursive accesses to some particular thing, and then you go through, that jumps through another template, during that template operation, we're gonna cache each of those things so that we're not having to repeat all of that work each time. And there are some, for those of you that were following what was going on in 219, I can't share the benchmarks on it, but we had multiple customers like during the development of 219 that were submitting support tickets saying, hey, we've got these playbooks and they just keep getting slower and slower, like what can you do for us? And so we'd have them send the things in and we look at it and it's like, wow, you know, there's like 2 or 3 pages of Jinja, like in all one template that's just doing all this crazy like data, you know, just really, really deep, nasty data conversion, because it's kind of hard to do some of this stuff in Jinja. We'll talk about a little bit of that later. But it's doing all this really nasty stuff, and then because of the way it works with it's repeating all of that stuff. Every time we go into every time we descend one little layer of any of this hierarchical crazy tree of stuff, it's like retemplating all that stuff, redoing all that work. It was just like, you know, n squared, n cubed, really, really nasty stuff. So just adding that caching, fixing the laziness, and most of the time the other thing is they weren't trying to get to the data that was, they were only using a little tiny path through the data. So by fixing those things and getting that stuff so that it was really only templating what was needed and caching those results, like literally orders of magnitude performance increase. It was really cool to see. Made me very happy. Because that wasn't necessarily what we were going for when we did it, but it was like, hey, it worked. Okay. So that little dumb package sample that we were talking about before, let's flesh that out a little bit more. Again, you know, really simple, trying to keep something that's grokkable for a 45-minute talk. So let's say we wanted to add a separate list of packages that's always installed on all the hosts. So you could do something like this in the task, just do it in line. You know, there's a few different things we have to pay attention to here, right? We've got, I've got the, okay, we've got 2 different variables now that have, you know, shared packages are the ones we're gonna install everywhere. The host packages are something you'd probably set in your inventory, you know, group level, host level, whatever. But those could both be optional, so we've got to have a default on both of them that are going to turn them into empty lists so that we're not trying to add a none and a list. And then we figured might as well like throw a unique in there just to make sure that we're not duplicating stuff. You know, hopefully the package manager is smart enough to figure that out, but let's just keep the outputs clean anyway. So we're starting to get, you know, a fair bit of logic in here. What happens if we want to reuse this? There's ways to do it. There's a bunch of different things, you know, like, well, the most common ones that I see is like, just copy and paste it. Yeah, it's simple, but rarely the best option. I think that's probably obvious, I hope. You know, you can wrap it up in a role. I mean, okay, if you've got a lot of other tasks and stuff to wrap around that, roles might be a decent place to do that, but otherwise probably roles are overkill for this. You could hide something in a Jinja plugin, you know. Custom filters can transform values and do whatever you want. There's lots of ways to do it. They're still kind of limited. It's much more limited than Python, you know, with comprehension syntax, but it's still reasonably powerful. And if any of you have ever tried to do any of that data manipulation stuff with the really limited set of tools that like GitHub Actions and some of these other things give you, Jinja is a godsend by comparison. Custom test plugins can answer yes and no questions. And then we can use those things, we can use those in other, we can use those to select and reject. But these things are kind of heavyweight. They have to be written in Python, and they require packaging and distribution of some kind. You have to get these things, whether you're shipping them along with your content, or somehow you have to get these things onto the host that's running Ansible. So they have the plus and minus of hiding complexity, and they have pretty good performance because Python is pretty performant, compared to just straight Jinja. So another option that most people don't know about is Jinja macros. They do show up. You see them on occasion, but they're not used a ton in Ansible. And part of that is because back in pre-219 days, there were all sorts of problems with them that kind of limited the way we could use them. We fixed a few things in 219 and up that make that easier. So Jinja macro is probably a little easier to write than custom, than like a Python Jinja plugin. It is a little more limited though. You don't have comprehensions, you don't have some of these other things. It is really nice though. In 219, we actually have these set up so that you can pass macros around as like a callable function. So I'll show you a little trick for that. This sort of worked if you were using Jinja native mode pre-219, but there were all sorts of dragons and problems, so we fixed a whole bunch of those in 219. The whole thing's still a little clunkier than it should be, but it's a neat trick if you haven't seen it before. So the tricky bit here is in this variable. So this thing, I've just got it all in line in the playbook. What? Oh, did it die or?
It's got too hot.
Oh, nice. We'll pause for a second.
Oh, it's here. Sorry, yeah. It's just right, so I don't.
Yeah, I heard it beep and I think it's
Yeah, maybe it just got, yeah.
Just turn my laptop screen around. You can.
Heating off, the windows open. You have the whiteboard. Half of the people have to leave.
It is pretty toasty in here. Okay, so we'll let that warm up for just a second. Anyway, so those of you that have the TVs in the back, you can see this. I've got a macro here. I've got it kind of broken out into multiple lines, and I've got comments in it, so it's bigger than it needs to be. But that little bit of logic that we had there, I wrapped all that stuff up inside that macro, and then. So this is just kind of standard Jinja. The actual name of this thing doesn't matter except for this part. So there's a bunch of things going on here, but we have to make sure that we don't get any extra. We have to make sure that we don't get any extra like carriage returns or anything emitted, because Jinja was written as a text templating language. So by default, if you've got it takes some of the carriage returns and things literally inside the template and wants to emit those back on the way out. So there are you'll see both in the YAML we've got the block chomping indicator. It says don't take the last carriage return off the end. And then we've got the same kinds of things in the macro. So this is the part I was saying it's clunkier than it should be, but it does work. But ultimately here is that little bit of logic that we had embedded in there, and we can actually pass the packages to this thing now just like a function. you could do this before, but you had to do it in every template or every place you wanted to use it. You had to have that macro, or you had to have an import statement or something to bring it in. So this trick gets rid of the need to do that. So we've got our macro defined, and then the last thing that we do in this template is we have a template expression that returns the macro function. It's not returning an invocation of the macro function, it's just returning the function object, the macro object. And so that, when you reference that variable, so any other template now, that thing's sitting in an Ansible variable. Any place where I say mash packages, like now I get that function object, I can just call the thing and pass packages to it. So once that thing's in there, you can see the invocation of it down here at the bottom. In my debug var, I have an expression, I'm just calling mash packages, just like it looks like a global function. So whatever you called the variable that it's hosted in, that's the name of the function, you can call it. So if that thing, once you've got that thing in a variable file and getting loaded by Ansible, you can use it anywhere you want in your content. So we've had people asking for things like Jinja macros and Jinja things as kind of first-class collection resources. I feel like this is it's clunky, but it's kind of at least a nice stopgap for the folks that want to do this kind of thing without having to splatter like Jinja includes and imports and stuff all over all the places where you want to use these things. Once you get them into the variable system, then they're just callable, they look like a function. So it's, you can put that macro anywhere you want. And once it's loaded, you can use it anywhere. So I think it's just kind of a neat little thing that I tripped over while we were working on this stuff. That's like, oh, I wonder if this works. Yep, it does. So we have a few other things in mind for like things we might want to enhance to make that work a little smoother, and ways to make them even more useful in the future, which I'm happy to talk about, or if we have time, I can wave my hands about it. But another thing, let's see, how are we doing for time? Okay, about 20 minutes or?
Yeah. Okay.
So another thing we want to talk about here is just like variable precedence when you're dealing with Jinja templates. I mean, I think probably most of you have seen, if you've been using Ansible for any length of time, you've probably seen the giant chart of variable precedence, and some of you probably committed it to memory. I'm looking at a couple of you in the room. Talking about how these things interact with templates. Templates and expressions always get evaluated inside of some kind of a context in Ansible. So remember I said, a playbook is not a template in itself. That's because like in order to do that, in order to actually evaluate all the individual templates in there, there might be, depending on how many hosts and whatever, there might be anywhere from dozens to thousands of different template contexts involved with this, each with their own unique stack of variables that are visible to the template. So when I talk about context and these things, it's really just like, where are the variable values coming from? We have this kind of layer cake of stuff that we put together with all these snapshotted variable values that, most of them are the same kind of, your extra vars, play vars, the, role vars, the things that kind of don't change across hosts. And then when you get down into the inventory things and facts, and they kind of fan out, and it's just, it's quite an impressive layer cake when you see that stuff put together, if you've ever seen the code in Variable Manager that puts it together. So anyway, the most common kind of context that probably do the heaviest lifting, you have like the play context with no host variables in it. That's the one that's doing like your play, like doing your play name, and it's going to your first chance at like the task. And if you've got templates in your play name or templates in your task name, the play context is the one that's doing that. The task and host vars one is kind of the normal one that's doing the vast majority of the heavy lifting. That's the stuff that's like, okay, we're getting ready to template this task for this host. That's like the one that does almost everything. And then if you've got loops, there's a version of that sits on top of that that's got the loop state like tied into it as well. So those of you, any guesses on what this is going to do? You just holler it out if you...
Where is the definition of my host var?
Well, let's assume it's some kind of a host level variable.
The first line it will be empty. On the second line from the host var, from the host, on two last lines from the host.
Depends on the configuration of Ansible, what it does with
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask this question, because we got a whole bunch of different answers. The answer is you're all right, because it depends on which version of Ansible you're running, it depends on the config, it depends on a whole bunch of other stuff. And so this brings us to our next little like problem case here, over the handlebars. So this is just another little aside, like what the heck's up with the templating? Why are templating play and task names? Why is this so hard? You know, luckily this is a pretty isolated case, but again, like, can I get a show of hands? How many people have had a problem putting templates in play or task names? Yeah, okay, it's like about half, at least half the room. That's, yeah. So many bugs. Like if you go look at, I mean, I don't know, it's well into the double digits, like how many different bugs people have filed and, you know, attempts to fix this thing, where every time somebody tries to fix it, they break something else, they make it worse. And so luckily this is a pretty isolated case because it's in a really weird place. Like I said, almost all of the templating stuff that happens down underneath that like kind of host and task and loop context, that stuff's all pretty solid, pretty well. This one's a really weird one. But the biggest problem is just the interactions with the callback are very complex. So there's a desire by most things to, we want, before we actually start doing any work on behalf of a particular host and task and delegating stuff off to a worker process, we want to get the callback to print us the like, hey, I'm working on this host, I'm working on this task or this play, so that if something happens, if the worker dies, if something goes bang, if you have some kind of catastrophic failure, at least you knew what you were working on when it happened. So that's why we try really, really hard to get that thing out there before we start delegating anything off to a worker process that might fail. That's kind of the biggest problem. There's a whole bunch of little fallbacks that people have added. There were a couple of things, like when I was actually when I was writing this talk, I found 3 more bugs while I was writing this talk in play, and we actually broke it in 2.19 for play. It used to be non-fatal. Now it's actually fatal in play in 2.19. I just found that bug like while I was writing this talk, so I have something to fix when I get home. So the shorter answer is, like, if you can avoid it, just don't. Like, it's cute, but just don't. If you have to, just use variables that are guaranteed to be defined above the host level, and you'll probably be fine. But so let's talk about some kind of growing pains. Like the deeper you get into Jinja. We've talked about this a little bit already, but Jinja doesn't support list and dict comprehensions. Like those of you that are familiar with Python, Jinja looks so close to comprehensions, so close, but it doesn't support those things, and it's really, really painful when you can't have them, especially because so like some of those things, map and select, like if you squint at it really hard, it feels like a comprehension. It's still not quite. And also this next one is the reason that hurts the most, because if you're working in Python, like if you didn't have, like, if you're looking at old versions of Python where you didn't have dict comprehensions, you could still get a lot of stuff done with just lists. You can still get a lot of stuff done with just for loops and like iterative adding and appending things to lists and adding things to dictionaries. Can't do that in Jinja. Jinja does not support that in any kind of normal way. There are lots of little hacks that people have come up with, and so, some of them are really clever, some of them are really ew, but Ansible, as like most of those things, are blocked in current things for security purposes. Let's just say, like, when you start providing access to dunder methods in Jinja, like, you can pretty much own the world. You can do anything you want. So most of those things are blocked in recent versions of Ansible. So those of you that have seen the set trick, with the like calling dunder set item on dictionaries and stuff, that's blocked by default. There is a knob to turn it back on for the things that are blocked, because we know there are people that are using this, but we're working on other ways to handle these things. So. Composing Jinja things is a lot harder than it should be. Like you saw some of the backflips we had to do to get a macro like set up and to do things like, hey, I want to project something into a dictionary. I want to add something. I want to mutate something. I want to pull something out of a collection. and then composing those things together. You know, if you want to compose a macro, if you want to, like, you can't use it, you can't pass a macro to select. You should be able to. That's one of the little tweaks that we're playing with, is updating some of the select, reject adder, like all of those things that can take tests. We're playing with ways to make those so that they can take macros. It actually, then you can kind of inline pass a macro to that thing, use it this way. So you can have basically like tests that aren't written in Python. You can have tests that are written in Jinja and still work with select adder and with a hypothetical future like list and dict comprehension filters and things. One of the other things I've mentioned, it's really easy to run into performance cliffs with Jinja. So you can because of all these things, people, and I've done it myself. I was doing it while I was writing this talk. I'm like, oh, there's got to be a way to do this, and it's just a little bit more. It's just a little bit more. It's just a little bit more, and then eventually you look at this thing and you're like, okay, I've got like half a page of Jinja here just to like project something and rename. I want to tweak the names of some keys, or I want to filter some stuff out of a dictionary, and I've got a half page of Jinja. Like, step back, look, and say, just declare bankruptcy, call it a day, try a different way. It's really easy to let those things get, when you're doing the other things we're talking about hiding complexity and like, it's really easy for those things to get out of hand. You forget about them, and then oops, you ran into a performance cliff because now you've got like an n-cubed algorithm for that's generating your inventory. I have lots of stories about that, and I kind of mentioned, we get these customer things that fall into that category. So I can share stories. I just can't show them to you. But at the end of the day, like, if you've got something that's noticeably slow that feels like it shouldn't be, like, file an issue on it. We've found a few of those just from users just kicking stuff out to us saying like, this seems like it shouldn't be slow. Why is it so slow? And it's like, oh yeah, there's something dumb. So yeah, if you see something like that, you run into it, please file an issue. And then just an exercise for someone who's, if you're bored. This is something I tried to do for this talk that I'm like, oh, this should be easy. I spent, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 hours on it, and like I still have the blood on my head from like the head desking. Try to use Jinja against our setup module to get a list of active nicknames on a Linux host that don't have any IPv6 addresses. If you're bored, like, I'll buy you a drink or something if you come up with a solution for this. And it's possible. I came up with a couple of things, but it's like, it's gross. So yeah, just avoid the growing pains. The big, keep it simple. Is there something you could do outside of Ansible? Obviously, understanding variable precedence is important. Reuse and compose these things, like try to hide the complexity a little bit so that people that are using your automation or people that are reading your automation can see what's going on. If you have all that stuff inline, completely inline, it gets really like inscrutable really fast. Try to minimize the copy paste and any other kind of monolithic, just big code things. And then, reshape your data where possible. We're guilty of this. That particular problem that I was talking about with the nicks, it's just kind of a dumb shape that's in the setup, that comes out of setup. It's like, if it was just this little bit different, it would be so much easier. And then like interactively test your templates, like play around with them a little bit. Like, don't just be like, oh, well, the playbook ran, like call it good. Play around with them in Ansible console, playing around with them in Ansibug. And then, like, I've mentioned, that we're looking at some new ways to fill in these gaps. So, like, ways to use macros as filters and tests. I actually have this all working. I was hoping to polish it up and actually have it released before this and be like, hey, look, but that part didn't happen. But yeah, it does work. And then those kind of expression and comprehension-esque filters that would let you do things that feel a lot more like Python list and dict comprehensions. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi. I got hit pretty hard. Sorry, I got hit pretty hard when 2.19 was released because of the sandboxing. I was the one that sent the bug with the hack.
Okay, nice.
The flag.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So after I know at some point that will stop working, and there's many things I still cannot do.
Yeah, we won't shut it off until we have a replacement.
But main thing I want to say is, over the years, people have been doing things like modifying variables in tasks, like these kind of things that people also just finish that workflow, and many other things all have. At the end of the day, what I feel is that the main problem is Jinja, right? Because Jinja still doesn't support things like cognitive comprehensions or even binary operator. So, we kind of go sorry, the method. Are there any thoughts about at some point making representations in a different type language? Like having the option to use something like not Jinja?
Or Python snippets.
Okay, so the question was, with a bunch of these changes around operators, like the things that we've kind of the little hacks that people have come up with that we've kind of had to disallow, or that we've had to nerf a bunch of things for security reasons. The question was if there would be other languages or other options that to do these things in. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but the Python snippets thing would be much more likely than like a Node.js or something, I would guess. There are some things that we played with in different ways to do plugins, plugins in different languages, but that aren't just modules. You can already do that with modules, but we have played with a few things. Some of the things with the worker model stuff we're messing around with, like that's top of mind. We're going for easy first, but yes. For some, Jinja plugins would be a really big lift for that, and there would be a lot of overhead to do that safely. So I don't want to give you much hope on that one, but yeah. Thank you for the bug report and the engagement on that though, because yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Time for one more question, I think.
Okay.
A quick one.
And if there isn't another question, I also have something I can demo real quick.
I'm not sure we'll have time for that.
Oh, we got
time.
Okay.
Okay, so I think some of you were at the Contrib Summit. I don't know how many years ago it was, where Civil and I demoed the register projections feature. But we finally dusted that thing off and kind of revamped it after all the data tagging 219, 220 stuff. So it is currently slated for 221. So basically what this gives you with register now, register, instead of just taking a variable name, register can take a dictionary of variable names and expressions. So you can project out, if you want, from a single task, you can take the result and pick it apart. You can bring in other results, graft everything together, do anything that you can do with a Jinja expression. You can get that to come out, and you can bring out as many of them as you want. Doesn't need quotes, doesn't need handlebars. It's just a straight expression. You can stack values, so you can access things that were registered. Like if you've got 5 variables, you can have the next one can register reference the previous one. Can't do that in setFact. And then for loops, you can access both the accumulated values as well as the individual values. You can do both. You can do either. You can do anything you want. It's one of those things you don't need it that often, but when you need it, and you've never been able to do it. So we did that. So, and we'll do a really quick show here. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, anyway, so here's the old one. Here's what it looks like now. So notice register. We have just 2 lines on register, and we have just expressions, no handlebars, no quotes. Yay. So this thing is out there right now if you do pip install fallible, or if you know how to build something from source. But if you just pip install fallible, you will get this, and you can play around with it. We would love to have any more feedback on it before we commit this. It's probably going to end up getting committed in the next few weeks if we don't get any showstoppers. So please play with that. Thank you very much. If you had questions for other things, please come find me. I'll be around.